Hello, I'm Jared Altick,
And I'm Kaleb Sackett.
and we're here with Matt Myer. Matt is campus minister at University of Kansas. And how are you today, Matt?
I'm doing great. Excited to be here.
Fantastic, fantastic. Caleb and I were thinking about what you do as a campus minister, and one role that you have is that you are a trusted minister who's at the university with our kids when they leave home for the first time and go to college. You're actually there with them, potentially available to help our kids successfully transition from childhood to adulthood. And I imagine you probably see quite a bit of growth in those kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Significant strides through their 4, 5, or 6 years that they're with us.
Especially the difference between like an incoming college freshman and even a sophomore has gotten to be a pretty wide gap.
Yes. Big learning curve those first couple of years, and it's hard to believe that you see someone walk in and you get to know them, and then like this last year, married a couple that, wow, what has happened in the last 4 years?
Yeah. Each of us are also fathers at different stages. I have 5 children between 12 and 21. And Matt, how old are your kids now?
I have a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 2-year-old.
Okay, so like kindergarten, preschool, that kind of range.
Mm-hmm.
And Caleb?
And I have one who is a newborn. He's 4 months old. So, we all are kind of at slightly different stages of fatherhood. And so that means our kids range from infancy and preschool all the way to actually college-aged in Jared's case.
Yeah.
And so Jared and I were thinking, Matt kind of is at the intersection of our two, kids' ages, spanning all the way from preschool up into college age. And so we were wondering, maybe you could tell us what are some of the ways that you get some unique insight into that, and maybe you can tell us some of the interesting ways that your kids, preschoolers and college students, actually are pretty similar, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that initially just jumps out to me is eating and food. The dinner table experience in our household is always exciting. We have children that decide to be picky at certain days, and they pick around their food, or they just don't want to eat, or they want something different. We have children that make a mess of trying to feed themselves, as we've taught them to, first starting with us feeding them, and then they get to start feeding themselves. And as they're starting to feed themselves, it's a mess. And so it's always exciting. I've been shocked to walk into the kitchen and 30 seconds later return to the table and just be like, whoa, what happened? I turned around for just a brief moment and you were able to do this. Yes. Like catastrophe.
But the college students, they're refined, of course, right?
Yes. They never make messes while they eat. I'm just always blown away at the amount of food they're able to consume in that moment. But still, even simple things, whether it be manners at a dinner table, or being extremely picky or not eating well or healthy, we run into those things where I have to find myself coaching both my kids at home and students at the campus ministry in this regard. And I think the beautiful parallel of that is in the Bible, where the author in Hebrews is talking to his audience, and in Hebrews chapter 5, he says, you guys should be somewhere right now. You should be teaching other people. But instead, I'm still having to feed you milk instead of solid food. You haven't grown in your capacity to ingest. And so as they've been learning and growing, they haven't gotten to a place where they can feed themselves. And so college students, when they show up at the university and we get to interact with them, it's some of their first experience of ever trying to feed themselves. And we get to walk along with them and watch some of the messes that are made as they try to feed themselves. I remember a young man who was very new to studying the Bible, and he got himself a girlfriend. And a couple weeks later, girlfriend comes to talk to my wife and I because there's an issue. And she said that she was going to take a class the following semester, and her boyfriend told her no, she couldn't, And then he went ahead and quoted the Bible that she needed to do what he told her to do.
Oh boy, I'm sure that went over well.
And I had to sit down with him and say, well, first of all, this verse that you're referencing is talking about wives and husbands. And he's like, well, girlfriend, boyfriend's basically the same thing. And I'm like, well, no, it's absolutely not the same thing. But when we're feeding ourselves, we can make a mess of things at times. Just like a kid, when they're first in the stages of learning how to feed themselves, they're not hitting their mouth every time with the spoon. My youngest has a huge issue with holding her spoon vertically instead of horizontally. Hey, darling, the applesauce isn't going to get to the destination if your spoon's not held the right way. And so we have to do a lot of coaching and teaching and instructing. And we find that with the college students in Bible study, in learning and growing to understand the scriptures. And so sometimes they can make a mess as they're learning to feed themselves, but our goal is to prepare them so that when they leave us, they're not dependent on me or someone else to find spiritual nourishment, but that they can dig in and study and learn and grow so that they can flourish and thrive and be the representative of Jesus that they're supposed to be. And so I see that picture with the food. The college ministry that I serve at serves a free meal every Monday night. And so we have a lot of students in the house, a lot of food being consumed. And some of the very things that I teach my kids, where after the dinner process, there's a cleaning up process. Some of these students, that training or development maybe never came into play, and we're picking up after people that we shouldn't have to. And so it gives us the opportunity to teach and instruct on a simple, basic life skill level, but then also we see it on the biblical side when it comes to eating.
I have a theory about kids that, there are definitely some kids who just were never taught some basic manners. They never really were held responsible for how they behaved at a table. For various reasons, different family dynamics and whatever. But I've also watched my own children be trained, learn and master a basic skill, eating at a table or something like that, and then somehow lose that in their teenage years. And my theory is that as an adolescent and young adult is gaining new information and going through new experiences, sometimes those old trainings weren't firm enough. They weren't set firm enough. They weren't ingrained enough. And you regress. And so while you're picking up something new, you've moved to a new location, you're learning like large quantities of new information, all of which is applicable in a college setting, that there's going to be some of those old skills that do exist. Their mother would be horrified to see them, at a dinner table, acting like a 5-year-old. But there's a regression there because they're taking on new information. But that's part of becoming an adult. Is like, okay, I'm going to learn new stuff, but I'm not going to lose the old things that I've learned. I'm going to try to keep all of this juggling all of them at the same time. And adults have the capacity to do that. It's just these really, really new adults don't always do that very well.
Yeah, we go to eat at another person's home, and our kids see how they do things or how they operate. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, there's another methodology out there or another opinion or philosophy on eating. And then they want to incorporate that. And so lots of times these students show up and they're new roommates, new friends, new people, and they see how people do things and they can just kind of adapt to that or transition to that. And I think you're right. If that teaching isn't firm and it's not articulated why we do what we do and why we do it the way we do it, then it's fragile and it's easily cast aside or changed.
Which is also true in the case of Scripture, like you were talking about earlier, the spiritual side of things, knowing why we do what we do.
There was a time we were leaving the next morning for a trip, and so we had taken our dog over to my parents' house to watch him, and we got done with dinner, and I was just like, why is there so much food on the floor tonight? And I was like, oh, my dog's typically running under the table, cleaning things up. And I saw just the mess that my kids were able to make so quickly. But when we clean up on Monday nights after a meal, I'm like, how in the world does this much food get on the floor? When these are adults eating, not children. Like, I understand the children's table over here, there's going to be some food on the floor. And so we see some of the basic things that maybe don't jump out to us right away when we get to step back and look. And it's awesome to see the group of students that do notice that stuff and they step up and they clean or they serve. And those are the ones that oftentimes I'm like, all right, I want to hear about your home life, your upbringing. I want to learn from some of these things, because not every kid that walks in is just completely immature or completely void of manners or anything like that. You know, we have a large group of kids that we get to interact with. I call them kids. They're not kids. Large group that we get to interact with that are mature, and they do have those types of skills, and they don't conform or change those. And so I like to hear their experiences from their childhood. Yeah.
Well, what's your next item? How else is a college freshman like a kindergartner?
I think big one is spiritual and physical aspects of discipleship. And we've kind of addressed it already, but one of my roles and responsibilities with my children is to disciple them. And oftentimes we want to make that a complete spiritual focus, but there's also a physical aspect to discipleship, training and developing them to thrive and to flourish as a human being. And so basic cleaning skills is like a first one. Audrey always wants to help clean. She's 5. And we want her to help and we want to teach her. The problem is it typically ends up making more of a mess than it does actually cleaning. And then you have to do more cleaning. And so we have to teach her and instruct her and give her opportunities to do it. We've taken some spring break mission trips where it's like, hey, we're going to clean these bathrooms. And you just kind of assign people. And then you walk in and you're like, did anyone clean in here? And some of them never gotten basic cleaning knowledge or been trained on how to clean a toilet, or there's more parts to the toilet than just the seat, right? And things like that. And so the physical side of discipleship with my kids is I have to, in front of them, model all the things that I want to teach them and show them. And so on that side with the campus ministry, we just have to invite students into our life to see us do things and model both the spiritual and the physical aspect of life. So there are some kids that like, they don't know how to grocery shop. Like
right.
I have this amount of money. I don't know how I can live off of it. I don't know how I could make meals out of this. And it's like, all right, well, let's show you how we make a plan and we find the things we're going to make and we determine what ingredients we're going to need. And then we go to the store and we look at the prices and the deals and the budgeted amount of money that we have and take them through that whole process where it's like, discipleship for us on some days is taking kids to the grocery store or taking them to the place to get an oil change or teaching them like, yeah, if you don't do these things continually, you know, your car is going to fall apart. And with my kids, that's the thing that anytime I'm doing something, if I want them to be able to do it one day, I need to invite them into that to say, here's why I'm doing this. I know this doesn't make a lot of sense to you, but this is the reason why I'm doing these things, which gives us the opportunity to invite them to think about life in a bigger picture, which is the Christian life, that we're not short-term thinkers. We're not temporal thinkers. We are eternal thinkers. We have a much larger perspective. And that moves into then consequences. We had a situation where a student made a lot of very, just emotional, quick decisions and landed them in a place. And they're like, I just don't know how I got here. I don't know how these couple of decisions landed me in this place where I am in over my head with money stuff. I don't know where I'm at academically. I feel like my relationship with God is just on the fritz. And we're able to say, if we step back in our decision making or why we do things and look at it with a bigger picture, we're able to see some of the things that could be on the horizon. And that's with children. They don't understand bigger picture things. We go to the store and we get things, and they know that we leave the store with things, but they don't understand all of the process of how that's done. We're starting to teach my oldest, concepts of money and, hey, if you do certain tasks, you can earn some money and you can use that money to then go purchase something. But all the things you have just been given to you. Yeah. Somebody has had to buy those things, though. And that's widening her scope or her perspective. And she's able to see things a little differently now to where she's like, oh, so if I clean the playroom, and if I do this and I do this, I can get, 50 cents or $1 or whatever's on the chart. And then if I collect enough, I can at the store get this thing that I want. Stuff like that, where she doesn't have a concept of the bigger picture. With college students, lots of times we're so focused on the right here and right now of everything, and it's the biggest thing in the world, that we're not able to step back and look at a much bigger picture. And I'm not talking about simply planning out your steps for the rest of your life, but looking at how each decision and each thing that's taking place around you is actually much bigger than just simply your little bubble that you're in.
Right. Well, going with the money example, I can distinctly remember when I was a college freshman and I had never worked a job before or anything like that, and I really didn't know the value of money. And I'm sure a lot of your college students run into that very same problem. And I can remember my dad had given me, I think, $400, and that was supposed to last me maybe my whole freshman year, maybe the first semester. I blew it all in like 6 or 8 weeks, and he ended up giving me $100 more and was like, this is it for the rest of the semester. But I learned, like, oh, okay, that's how quickly money can go, and this is how much things cost. And I spent quite a bit of that $400 on pretty frivolous things that weren't, necessary for me. And so I can imagine that you encounter that quite a bit with your students.
Yes. Learning to budget, or learning to understand the value of trading labor for income, things like that, where all of a sudden it's your responsibility and you're in charge of regulating your spending, how you use your time. All those things are huge things that we have to walk through. I think time management is one of the number one topics that I spend time talking about. Yeah. And from our standpoint, as Christians, we want to steward the blessings and the resources and the gifts that God has given us. And time is one of the number one things. How do we steward the time that God has given us well? And again, thinking bigger picture with students, then they have to start assessing, okay, part-time job, class, and then I have extracurriculars, maybe a girlfriend or a boyfriend. All of a sudden I have to start looking at, what am I giving myself to? Am I giving myself to things that have lasting value, or just temporal emotional satisfaction or pleasure or enjoyment that isn't really something that is going to long-term be part of the flourishing and thriving as a disciple of Jesus?
Yeah.
So learning to see the bigger picture, both little kids and college
little kids
students.
And college kids, yeah. And they're different maybe concepts, but it's all really the same. It's just continuing to grow to be able to see that perspective.
So what's another point of comparison between college students and little kids?
Leaving home for the first time. So I remember my oldest first day of preschool. And we took her to the church, and we had a tour beforehand. She got to meet the teachers, and we took her on her first day, and I remember her turning around and saying, "Are you staying with me?"
Oh,
and it's
rip
like,
your heart out.
Yes.
Step on it.
That moment where it's like, no, I'm not. And the tears welling up in the eyes, and then by the end of the day, her teacher's like, you know what? She got it. She came around. She had a great day, and then it became something she looked forward to. But then there would be days that popped up where a teacher would be like, she just kept talking about how she missed her daddy or her brother or her mommy, and these kind of things. Or she had a rough day. She was kind of emotional, or whatever it may be. And that learning experience of my whole life, I've been at home. And now I'm somewhere different. And with college freshmen, for the most part, this is their first experience leaving home, leaving their parents. And we run into a lot of the same things that you may see for a preschooler or a kindergartner. My daughter is going to start kindergarten in the fall. And she's both excited at some moments, super excited, and then very scared at other points. Hesitant. We see young people come and think, I'm finally free. There's no chance I'm going to miss mom and dad. And literally one young woman 2 days after moving into the dorms, called us and asked if she could come to our house. And she laid on our couch and she cried all night. She missed her mom and dad.
Yeah.
And there was no chance she could visit them because of the proximity where she came from. And you don't think maybe you're going to miss your parents. It's finally freedom. Or you come and you think it's going to be something and it's not what you thought, and your expectations are shattered and you feel alone. You have to learn tough lessons being in a new environment. Kids going to school. And I remember my oldest coming home one day and telling me a thing that another student did. And she was like, I can't believe she did that. And I was just like, yep, you're going to experience things in life that are going to be tough, especially when you get into these new environments. And so we've had young people that have come and they've struggled. They've struggled because they've felt alone or isolated, or they've experienced new tough things that are challenging. And I would love to say that you're able to walk with them through that and everything goes perfect. But we've had young people leave after being at school for 2 weeks and go home, and they're done. And so I think for us, as we prepare and work with our children to step out into new situations and new environments, whether that's school or like our middle one's first year of VBS this year, where it's like you're going to go be with these people by yourself, and he's like, what? But we have students with that. It's like, yeah, you're by yourself, and you're going to take care of this, and you're going to go do this, and you don't have that safety net. But then we have the opposite too. We have others who this is the first chance that maybe they're getting to operate in a capacity that's really good for them.
Yeah.
They're leaving something maybe dysfunctional or hard behind. And so we see that too, which helps us to learn with our kids, where the disconnect between that family structure or whatever helps give us insight. So I think the big one here, leaving home for the first time and learning and growing and experiencing all the different things that's going to offer is crucial, both for children my age and for college students. And so they work hand in hand. And again, on the scriptural side, Jesus' commission to his people is that they would be people that go. We got to go places. We got to step out and do things. And for our students, when they're taking those steps of leaving home, we're trying to talk and prepare them for this is one of the first steps. There's going to be so many places that God is going to send you. And whether that's just, across the hallway to your neighbor's door to knock on it and invite them to something, or it's to a new job after you graduate, or it's to a new school, whatever it may be, God's going to send his people to all the areas of not just this country, but the world to do his work for him. And so we're always going to be a going and sending people. And so those situations, new environments, I'm in a new place. How do I get connected to a church? How do I do this? Well, I use my kids as an example because we travel around a lot. And so they're at new Sunday school classes or new little children's churches or whatever it may be. Different dynamics of churches. Some churches we go to don't have any of those, and they're right in the service. And they have to kind of grow and adapt and work through those things in these new environments. And so for our students, it's like, hey, you have to be the one that takes the step to say, you know what? Yes, I'm new, and yes, I don't know anybody, but I'm going to get up and I'm going to step foot into, this new local church, or I'm going to go meet people.
Now, I realize that most of the students at KU I shouldn't even say most, but a large number of them are coming from quite a distance. Even in-state students, maybe, 3-4 hours from home. And so I imagine a lot of them really are on campus, and other than turning to you or an RA or something like that there's not a lot of places for them to go to get some extra parenting that they need. But I'm curious, on the other end of the spectrum, have you had very much experience with parents that show up and want to continue to be kind of hover over their students, even though they're away at college? Mom and dad keep showing up and helping maybe a little bit too much.
Yes, I have. And there's this weird tension and balance in that where, on some hands, I love that parents are continuing to invest and they care.
Sure.
But then there's the not allowing, their child to fail. That's sometimes that's a good to mess up and to learn lessons. or always wanting to prevent everything that could possibly take place from taking place. I had one student, and he was a great young man, and we got close and spent a lot of time together. And I probably talked to his mom more than I talked to him on the phone. Like, she would call all the time and want to check in and want to know things.
Right.
And the biggest tension in us was, you know what? I'm not your like spy to just tell you everything that's going on in his life. And I'm not going to go into the intimate details that we talk about, and the things that he's going through. I will be glad to, check in with you on a regular basis and let you know, like, yeah, things are going well. He's doing good.
He's still alive.
And things like that. And if you have some specific fears or concerns, we can talk through that. But it's hampering him that you've kind of intruded on a new space where he's getting to, spread his wings for the first time. Yeah. And so we have to be gentle in that, because I can't imagine, and you could probably speak better to this. I haven't ever sent a kid off to college. And so one day I'm going to be flipped in my role. And so,
well, and it is something that, a lot of what we're talking about training children, but some of these things as a parent, you have to be training yourself, and you cannot be dropping your kid off at college for the first time and that be the first time you've ever sent them off to do something by themselves, where they really could fail. They really could make their own decisions and make bad decisions. You need to be prepping them and really prepping yourself as the mom and dad, in advance. And so something we talk about a lot between my wife and I, we talk about, okay, we're preparing them to leave the nest, which means they need to go do this thing, and it might actually be good that they fail. We don't want their very first disappointment and failure in life to be when they're 18. And so we have to let them go do something badly, even though we could swoop in, intervene, and fix it. We need to just let them fail, and it'll be bad and they'll be upset, but that's okay, and they need to experience it, and we as mom and dad need to experience it before they leave for college.
Yeah, I think Jesus did this really well.
Yes.
He spends time, he's training, developing, he sends them out, and they come back, and the first thing that is mentioned is they talked about what happened. They talked about what went on wherever they were. They had like a debrief session. They're learning. And as we send our children to do things, and we're asking and we're talking, or we're checking in with their preschool teacher or their kindergarten teacher, how they're doing, how they're developing, we're learning and seeing how we can continue to better prepare them to go, so that on those days we can send them out with confidence, not just confidence that we've done what we're supposed to do, but a confidence that God is overseeing all of this and he's at work, and we can trust him. We can trust him with our kids. And that's one of the biggest lessons for me, as in the stage of life that I'm in, where my oldest wants to try everything. And she wants to try it until she doesn't want to try it. And then I'm in that tension of, I kind of didn't initially want you to try this, but now that we've gotten here, now that we've gotten to the water slide at church camp, now you got to do it.
Yeah.
Because you said you wanted to do it, and we're here. And letting them take those steps where they're learning things. We've been practicing dribbling the basketball on the driveway, and my oldest got her first fat lip from looking down at the ball and missing it and it coming up and bouncing off her face. And she's like, I don't like that. What? Yep, I don't like it either. And it makes me sad. But that's one of the lessons on how we dribble and how we look at the ball, and how we grow to be more effective in our dribbling, so that we don't dribble and it bounces up and hits our face. So we use the moments where there's a failure not as a this is the end, but it's an opportunity to grow and to learn. And thanks be to God that he gives us all kinds of opportunities to do that. And so the other thing with our students is mistakes and failures, specifically conviction from the Holy Spirit. It should not be something that fills us with guilt or shame. Rather, we should be encouraged because God's showing us a better way to do things. That we look at conviction and our initial responses. And I see it in my kids when something bad happens and I don't want to do it anymore. And I see it in college kids where when I've done something bad or I've messed up, I want to separate or I want to isolate or I don't want to feel that feeling. And we have a negative thought about it. But we try to coach them and say, when you feel God tugging at you, that's one of the greatest gifts he'll ever give you. That is an encouraging thing that he's at work in your life and he wants to show you a better way. He literally wants to transform you to think and operate differently. And I see those same parallels with kids and teaching them things where something's hard. I don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Well, when it's
some
hard,
of the best things in life are hard.
yeah, that's when we lean in. And with students, as they're growing and they're feeling conviction, maybe they're starting to dig into the word and they're seeing things a little differently and they're like, oh, this is uncomfortable. It's that great moment where it's like, man, God is at work. And this is exciting and encouraging. And you should be, jazzed up that God wants to intimately deal with you and work with you to sanctify you and transform you into what he has intended you to be.
And seeing those differences, they're exciting. It's, we're at a phase where my son doesn't do a whole lot, but there are small, tiny little changes every single day. And every single one of those is really exciting, whether it's like you're sitting in your chair slightly differently and now you're owning it a little bit more and you're rocking back and forth and it's like, is that a big deal? Not that much. But it is, though, because that means he's learning, he's growing, he's developing. And that's awesome to see that both in your kids and also in the students that you work with. So what's another point of comparison?
I call them light bulb moments. So my youngest has some health issues that have kind of stalled some of her development. And currently, as we're working through some different stuff, it is so awesome. The joy, the smile, the bright way her face lights up when she does something. And we're like, yay, you did it. This is so awesome. And she just gets this look on her face. And it's seriously the cutest look. It's that moment of like, I did it, or I get it, or I figured it out. And it can be little, super tiny little things like, hey, here's a piece of trash. Can you take it to the trash can? And she'll run over and she'll keep looking back. And then she drops it in the trash can and we're like, oh, you did it. Currently we celebrate bathroom visits. And when we have successful bathroom visits with her, it's like, yay. And she claps her hands and she gets all excited. And we see those moments where something starts to click in your kid's eyes and they get so just ecstatic. My oldest, we have this little puzzle ball where you're trying to get the balls of a certain color into the circles of a certain color. And she would sit there and just, determined. And she'd be like, I can't do it. And we, show her and teach her and instruct her. And the day that she got it, she was telling everybody. She's at the grocery store. And she's like, hey, I did the puzzle today. And this random stranger's like, great, okay. But she's so excited. She got it. She figured it out. Or when a concept makes sense to someone. I love fielding questions from 5-year-olds. That's a joke. I get what, why, all the time. But we're leaving church one Sunday, and the preschool lesson had been about God, and God is referenced as the Father, and Jesus was referenced as the Son. And so she's saying God is the Father, and Jesus is the Son. And 2 weeks later, there was a lesson, and Jesus was referenced as God. And she's like, nope, God is Jesus' Father. And I'm like, well, yes. All right, Matthew, how are we going to tackle the Trinity with a 5-year-old? Let's figure this out. But the intrigue where I'm drawing a picture, I'm making circles, I'm trying to connect the dots. And she's like, so God is the Father and Jesus is the Son, but God and Jesus are the same? Yes. And she's like, and the look on her face, like, I didn't have to tell her what to say. She said it herself. She was so excited and so proud. And I love seeing those moments with college students as well. I think you referenced it earlier. In those first year, first 3 or 4 semesters, they have so many light bulb moments where they're just learning about life. They're learning about themselves. Some of them come in and they've been told things about themselves their whole life. And they've been conditioned to believe things that are true about them that just frankly aren't true sometimes.
Yeah.
And when they start to step out and do things, I've been told I've been shy my whole life, but all of a sudden, here I am. I'm in this group full of people. I got up in front of this room and I talked tonight. I can do this stuff. And they have those light bulb moments where they try something new. I've never done this. We had a couple students that were real hesitant to go on a spring break mission trip a couple years ago. And I challenged them to, pray, see if, God really wants you to do this. If you ask him, and both of them came and they said, we just couldn't shake the feeling that God was telling us to do this. And they left and it was like this great experience. And to see the look on their face as they're telling other kids the following year that are struggling with wanting to go, like, I was where you were, but then I experienced this thing, and they have those light bulb moments. I talk about them a lot when it comes to studying the Bible, where maybe their whole life they've been in church and they've never actually studied the Bible themselves.
Yeah.
And so everything, they have thoughts or ideas or perceptions of what's in there. They have thoughts and perceptions about how the church operates or how God's people operate or how God operates. And then they dig in and they're like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. So one of the ones in 1 Corinthians 3, a couple years ago, we're studying it, and a young man is reading, and then he's like, Paul says they're acting like they're merely human. What does that mean? And so we start to talk about how in Christ and empowered by the Spirit, we're no longer just merely human, that we're actually holy. We're set apart. And we looked at the imagery of how priests would take just objects and they would be consecrated, and then they would no longer be for common use. They're not just a mere object. They're now something holy for a holy and specific practice. And that's us as believers, that we are set aside, set apart, holy for a holy purpose. And we're not just merely human, that we have a supernatural power at work in our lives. And the look on this kid's face, and he's like, even me? Yeah, man. And he was just like, this changes everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And those moments, I love those moments with my kids, and I love having them with college students where they just, their eyes open wide. And we see, like in the old comic books, the light bulb pops up above your head, and that's the picture. I get it, or I see it, or I figured it out. And I get, I'm just blessed by God to get to participate in a lot of those at home and at the campus ministry.
I feel like there's a lot of parents who are pretty negative toward the university culture. And they're like, well, my kid, I want them to be a lawyer, a doctor, or whatever, but I'm really concerned about the kind of things they're going to learn at a secular university. And yet you're describing the kind of spiritual formation, the kind of discipleship that happens within a campus ministry. This is happening at a secular university. Mm-hmm. And I'm a big fan of the University of Kansas. I was born in Lawrence. I'm from there. But I know that the university represents certain ideas and teaches a lot of things that we don't necessarily want our kids to learn that comes along with their education. And yet you're doing some of this work and seeing some of those light bulb moments that are things that we as Christian parents deeply desire our kids to learn. And that's happening at a secular university. Mm-hmm. And I just marvel at that. I think that's wonderful, the kind of influence you have, the kind of work that you do there.
Well, I think that's the biblical model. We see Paul through his travels he doesn't avoid the places where it's going to be hard or challenging or where there's going to be competing ideas or philosophies. He kind of charges head in. Yeah. Whether it's when he's traveling through Greece and he's talking to philosophers on different gods or different ideas and reasoning or debating. He does it in synagogues where he knows he's going to be kind of challenged, maybe even beaten or stoned. He heads to Corinth where there's temples and all kinds of just crazy activities that are taking place. We try to think about it in terms of the Daniel approach. Daniel is exiled to Babylon. Mm-hmm. you're not going to find a worse place. And Daniel, all through the book of Daniel, we see him do some things that we want to challenge our students to do. You see, Daniel comes and he's told, the name that you've been given, that your God gave you, we're going to call you something different. We're going to say something different about you. We're going to give you an untrue name, and we want you to believe that. And so we have to battle the things that are going to come at us that aren't true, and we have to know who we are first in order to do that. And so we have to know who God is and who we are.
Yeah.
And then Daniel wouldn't waver. He's told that he needs to just compromise on your diet. I know you guys have this diet and God wants you to eat this way. Just compromise on your diet. That's all we're asking you to do. We're going to educate you in all of our ways and train you up so that you can be a representative of Babylon, not a representative of your God. And Daniel wouldn't compromise. And in fact, in doing so, gained and earned respect from people who had authority in that area. And so then, in the moment where a huge catastrophe is taking place and Daniel and his friends are going to be killed, Daniel steps up and says, I'll go interpret the dream. I'll tell the dream and interpret it. And the first thing he does when he walks back into the room is he's like, all right, guys, we got to pray. We got to ask God to do this. He stepped up and put himself out there knowing that he didn't know the dream or the interpretation and said he would deliver because he trusted God.
Yeah.
And the first action he took was to pray. And so we have a model when we're in these places that we work with students through on knowing what we need to know about God and ourselves so that we can be confident and that we won't compromise and that we would be willing to trust God and step out and be used by him. So Daniel and his compadres get high titles, high positions, authority in Babylon. And Nebuchadnezzar, who himself thought he was a god, actually said that your God is greater.
Yeah.
And these are teenagers. These are kids.
Yeah.
And so we want to use that model here where we can train and develop ourselves to go in and learn things. Daniel went in and he learned all that the Chaldeans taught or the ways of the Chaldeans. And he was still able to negotiate through that process. And so we want to prepare and help them do that because whatever environment you're in life, that's going to happen.
Right. It's not about sheltering these kids or these students and saying, we don't want you seeing these, bad things that can happen in life or the realities of the world. It's like, no, we know you're going to be living in this real world, and we want you to know how to deal with it and cope with it and to live in a biblical manner in the midst of that and not just try and run away from it, basically. So do you have one more way that kids are like college students and vice versa?
Yeah, I think it's in my ability to work backwards from each of them. So the reason I put it like that is when I'm working with my children, basically I bring my life experience into it. And so I'm thinking about my childhood, my upbringing, what I did. I make jokes a lot with the students where I don't know how many times as a kid I said, when I'm a parent, I'm never going to do that. And then I find myself doing that thing and I'm like, man, maybe my parents made a little more sense than I thought they did when I was 13, 14. But I'm using my life experience. And with the students then, them sharing their life experience with me, I get to see, hey, each year, the students that I get are closer and closer to my own kids' age and their track and process. And so I get to learn some stuff from them and their life experience. I get to look at ones that have great relationships with God and their families and kind of take away some tips and tricks.
There. Yeah.
And then I have some that I'm like, okay, I don't want my kid to go to college and be here. Mm-hmm. So I get to learn some things from that life experience as well, where I can address stuff, hey, you and your parents are in major conflict and you're struggling in this area and you've, abandoned kind of what you think God is and what you want to do with him. How do we get here? And we can work through that together. So I learn a lot that way. And I think that's from my kids then I get to work backwards to the college students, where as I'm working with them, teaching and instructing, I see things that my kids do, and if I see the same thing in the college students, I can kind of piece together like there was some training and development issues that took place along the way, or they've forgotten a lesson or something like that, and I get to continually work backwards towards each situation, and I get to use those examples in both of their lives. So my children are sermon illustrations all the time, Bible study illustrations all the time. And the students understand and comprehend and connect those stories because they're around us so much. They know my kids, they know their personalities, they know the things they do. And those lessons that I can connect to the biblical lessons impact the students because they see it. They see it in front of them. And then with my kids, I can talk about the students, and I can talk about things we do with them and why we do it and things that happen and how one day I can start to prepare them and guide them towards, hey, we're dealing with this thing right here with this. And our kids are around. They see the stuff. They see the kids come to our house. Why is so-and-so crying? Why is this happening? Well, here, because some of the things that we're teaching you that you don't understand or you don't want to do, because they didn't have all those lessons, and we get to work backwards.
That must be such a cool interaction because a lot of the students that you work with, they probably don't spend a lot of time with little toddlers, except that they see your kids all the time. And likewise, how many preschoolers are there out there that they're the only kid around and they're surrounded by adults and a whole bunch of 18 to 23-year-olds? Not many, but I know, your daughter came to camp with us a few weeks ago, and there were a bunch of high school students, a bunch of college students who were counselors, a few adults, and then your little daughter.
Yeah.
And that must be great to be able to teach from that very different perspective that not a lot of kids get to have. And same with your college students too. Like, hey, here's what my little child is going through, and you can learn from that.
Yeah, the payoff, I'd have to imagine, for some of these college students who in a few years are going to be married and having kids of their own, but they spent time in your house and saw you and your wife managing and training and teaching and just raising these little kids. They are going to have absorbed lessons that maybe they don't even realize yet. Yeah. That's just going to be incredibly valuable to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the highest compliments that I've received, or at least in my perception, some of the things that mean the most to me are when some of our students will leave and get married and have a kid, and they'll call and they'll be like, "Hey, I got this, and I remember." Yeah, and that's high praise to me. Where, you've watched us, and they get to see the good and the bad. They get to see. Monday night we had dinner and Bible study at our house, and our oldest wasn't able to participate because there was an issue that happened, and it was a significant issue for a 5-year-old. And so when the friends came over to do dinner and Bible study, she had to go to her room and do some of her coloring and cleaning and things that she needed to do because of what happened. And she was devastated. And this was huge for her. And the students were equally devastated. Like, hey, where's she at? And we explained. And one of the students was like, and it's like, no, there has to be a lesson. And this is one of the most important things to her. And so there has to be a lesson in this like situation that she's going to miss out on this little bit of fun tonight because of this. And one of the students was like, man, I would have such a hard time not just want to give in and be like, okay, you can come down here. And
welcome to parenting.
And it's a challenge, but we get to walk through those types of lessons, and we get to share the times that we messed up with both groups so that they can also work backwards. Yeah. I think one of the biggest pictures of this in the Bible is the correlation between remembering and obedience, remembering and living out a faithful life. Nehemiah chapter 9, Nehemiah and Ezra are reading. They've read the book of the law after they had finished the wall, and Nehemiah starts to tell the story of God from the beginning, and he tells of how God was faithful and that God delivered and God provided. But then he says something that all of a sudden it's about to change. God did everything that he had sworn to do, and then he says, but they are fathers. They acted presumptuously, and they stiffened their neck, and they didn't obey the commandments. And then he tells how when things got bad and they cried out to God, that God came and helped. And then there was another but, and it says, but they forgot the faithfulness of God and his law. And then things got bad. And then they cried out to God, and he came back. And Nehemiah wants them to remember all of the things that have taken place, remembering what God has done, and remembering how he's faithful, and learning from these moments where our ancestors did this stuff. We don't want to do that. And so learn from it and grow. And so it's healthy for us to remember. And we see Jesus do it when he has his last moments with his disciples. He's like, this isn't going to make sense to you right now, but I'm going to take this bread and I'm going to take this juice and this is going to represent my body, and this is going to represent my blood of the new covenant. And when you're together, you need to do this, and you need to remember me. You need to remember what I did. And in the moment, it's like, okay. But then we see that they're like, oh, this makes sense, that it's actually beneficial for us to sit down, to take a moment to stop, and to remember the works of God, to remember the life of Jesus, to remember his death and his resurrection and his ascension to heaven, because that's actually going to help us do what we're supposed to do better. And it's why when we get together as a family corporately in our services, it's why we spend time doing communion. It's not some arbitrary exercise or it's just some ritual, but it's a moment for us to stop and to say, we're going to look backwards, we're going to remember, so that we can be faithful and that we can be obedient. It encourages us and gives us hope. And so those exercises with the students, I think, are really helpful. So going backwards from both crowds.
That's amazing, Matt. I so appreciate what you're doing, the ministry, the investment in the lives of these young adults, their children in the process of becoming adults. And you're right there really speaking into their lives, biblical truth. And wow, I'm just really impressed and really appreciative of what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks so much for stopping by today. Thanks for teaching us and people who are listening how to be a good father, a good thinker, a good leader, and someone who is biblically and spiritually shepherding people and helping them to progress and grow, not just as humans, but in their walk with Christ as well.
Absolutely. I was really glad to do it. I'm humbled to get to do what I do. Someone did it for me when I was a young and foolish college student, and so I'm really thankful that God's allowed me the opportunity to do this.
Thank you, Matt.